A highly anticipated meeting finally coming to fruition. For the first time ever, America's third highest ranking official meeting with Taiwan's president on U.S. soil. Beijing is lashing out, staging a warship in waters off Taiwan. How will it impact U.S. China relations? Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen is back in the U.S. This time, she's meeting with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy in California. As Speaker, McCarthy is the third highest ranking U.S. official, following the President and Vice President. A bipartisan group of lawmakers also attending the event. China lashing out, saying the visit will, quote, only strengthen the Chinese people's strong will and determination to share a common enemy and support national unity. The U.S. responding, with Secretary of State Antony Blinken emphasizing that the visit is nothing new.
In fact, every Taiwan president has transited the United States at one point or another.
Adding China should not take it as an excuse to ratchet up tensions.
Given that, Beijing should not use the transits as an excuse to take any actions to ratchet up tensions.
Taiwan's defense ministry said on Wednesday a Chinese aircraft carrier group was in the waters off the island's southeast coast. China claims democratically governed Taiwan as its own territory and has warned of unspecified retaliation if the meeting goes ahead. China staged war games around Taiwan last August, following the visit of Taipei of then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. A Chinese aircraft carrier group spotted in the waters off the island's southeast coast. According to what Taiwan's defense ministry said on Wednesday, it happened the same day Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen met U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy in Los Angeles. But some residents from Taipei, Taiwan's capital, say they're unfazed.
They might impose some sanctions, or some of our agricultural products will be sent back again, and so on. So I think there might be some moves like that. We will just take things as they come. That's just life, isn't it?
Another resident said what China is doing may even be helpful for Taiwan's visibility. And joining us to give insight into the rhetoric coming out of Beijing is Casey Fleming, CEO of Black Ops Partners. Casey Fleming, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
So Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen is in California today meeting with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. China is upset about this. They issued a statement saying, quote, it will only strengthen the Chinese people's strong will and determination to share a common enemy and support national unity. What do you make of them using the term enemy here?
I think it's massively significant. We know through our contacts inside of China that they propagandize their people and program their people. They're young, they're middle class, everybody, that the United States has been their enemy all along. But this is the first time that we're aware that they have leaked this outside of China, that the common enemy is the United States. And if you look at the article, there is no way you can think that Taiwan is the common enemy because China believes Taiwan is theirs and it's their own. So Taiwan is not their common enemy. That's their ownership, their common ownership. So the common enemy absolutely is the United States and by proxy, the free world.
And to your point, the Chinese Communist Party does view Taiwan as part of their own territory, and I think that's a huge part of Xi Jinping's rhetoric. So with them using this term enemy in terms of the U.S., what does that mean in terms of U.S. China relations? What is Beijing's goal here, their end goal?
Beijing's end goal is to take over the United States and the free world one step at a time, to weaken the United States and our allies one step at a time, which they've been doing very well, and then eventually take over and win the war without fighting. and you connect that with all the other aggressive things that the CCP has done, even way back well before the balloon incidents, but all the other things that we see that are stealth as far as theft of intellectual property and infiltration and subversion through our population, our schools, our social media, fentanyl, all those type of things. That is what you have to understand what's going on. And I think it's very significant that they come out and say at this point, now that Xi Jinping is basically totalitarian ruler for life, for them to come out and say the word enemy. We've known that. The folks in the counterintelligence community have known that, they've targeted us as their main enemy, their only enemy.
And Casey, given that Beijing is openly stating the U.S. as an enemy, we have the leader of the free world, President Biden, saying we seek competition, not conflict in terms of China. So how do you balance the two sides? What's happening here?
We'd like to keep the status quo as it is today. But on the other side, you can't control your enemy. Your enemy thinks that they're your enemy. They are your enemy. They have acted as your enemy. But you want to believe that there's still something called, quote, competition. So it's not competition, it's war, and it's unrestricted war against the United States and the free world. And every day that we continue to use the word competition is eventually killing American lives in the future, because every day that we're focused on competition, we're not focused on unrestricted warfare.
And on that note, it seems if we zoom in on this visit between President Tsai Ing-wen and Kevin McCarthy, the Chinese consulate in Los Angeles reportedly is paying people affiliated with pro-Beijing groups to protest this. And this report is saying about $400 to each person to really disrupt this meeting. What's your take on that?
All is fair in love and unrestricted warfare. But just be aware that's what's going on, and the American people are seeing that. That's what the media is picking up, and they think that's real. And it is real to the point that people are being paid to be actors, but they're not being paid to be real citizens. So you have to understand it's an alternate world that's out there that's being controlled by the CCP, and it's happening on your soil. These people are being paid to be manipulated to go out and protest against what's really going on. And it's not just Chinese people, and it's not just any American. I mean, there's all types of people that are taking the $400 to go protest. But it's also Chinese gangs that they've lit up in LA to go out and protest this, and in other cities as well.
Casey Fleming, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Next, imagine a substance up to 50 times more potent than heroin and lethal enough to kill an estimated 70,000 Americans in 2021. Worse still, users can't see, taste, or smell it. Enter fentanyl, a synthetic opioid. It's running rampant on U.S. soil, often laced into other drugs, since it's cheaply made and highly potent. But what about outside the U.S.?
Acudimos a usted, presidente Xi Jinping.
We come to you, President Xi Jinping, for humanitarian reasons to help us control shipments of fentanyl that may be getting sent from China to our country.
That's Mexico's president reaching out to Beijing for help. That's as Mexico City fends off U.S. criticism that the country isn't doing enough to stop trafficking of the synthetic opioid. Some of those critics suggesting Washington should intervene militarily in Mexico. The U.S. says ingredients used to make fentanyl largely come from China's Wuhan city. From there, they're shipped off to Mexico and other nations for cooking, with some ending up on the other side of the southern border. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador read out the letter to Chinese leader Xi Jinping, dated March 22nd. In it, he asked Xi to provide details on when and where fentanyl was being sent, as well as how much and who's sending it. He noted Mexican law enforcement destroyed nearly 1,400 labs last year that had been mixing the drug with other substances. Officials also seized 7 tons of it. Mexico says the drug isn't made within its borders and that cartels instead buy it from Asia. The Chinese embassy in Mexico did not give immediate comment. The letter comes soon after the North American Leaders Summit held in early January. There, leaders of the U.S., Canada, and Mexico directed their officials to ramp up efforts to address North America's synthetic opioid epidemic. They agreed to coordinate on prosecuting drug traffickers, dismantling criminal networks, and blocking trafficking. Soon after, in late February, the White House sanctioned a network of Sinaloa cartel members in Mexico. That's for their ties to the illegal drug trade. Washington scoring a diplomacy win. The U.S. has persuaded a NATO ally to block Chinese companies from upgrading a key port in Europe. That ally is Croatia, a nation in Eastern Europe. It's part of NATO, the most powerful military alliance in the world. The port in question is called Rijeka. This deepwater seaport is a gateway to Central Europe. 3 years ago, 3 Chinese state-owned companies won a bid to build a terminal for shipping containers there. The news set off alarms in Washington. That's because the U.S. Navy uses the port for ship repairs. NATO also uses the port to move military goods out of Europe. If the port comes under Chinese control, it would make it harder for NATO and other countries to push goods and operations through the port. That's according to then U.S. ambassador to Croatia. A report from the Wall Street Journal said officials from the U.S. and the EU weighed in on the issue. Afterwards, Croatia canceled the tender with the Chinese companies. The over $3 billion contract since went to a domestic company and a Danish shipping giant. The companies are expected to finish the upgrade's construction by 2025. But the deal hasn't completely wiped out Chinese influence. The container terminal is still buying cranes from a Chinese company. Ports use cranes to load and unload container ships. China controls the global seaport crane market. Back in the U.S., around 80% of the cranes operating in American ports were made in China. And concerns are rising that Beijing could use the sensors on these cranes to spy on what America is moving in and out of the country. The Chinese spy balloon is back in the spotlight. An NBC News report says the Chinese spy balloon that traversed the U.S. collected intelligence from sensitive military sites, and that the balloon sent that data to Beijing in real time. Here's more.
The balloon was once spotted over the sky of Montana, home to a U.S. Air Force base that houses 150 ballistic missile silos. The report said the balloon collected intelligence mostly by picking up electronic signals rather than taking pictures. The Pentagon says Tuesday that it's not sure if the balloon sent real-time intelligence data back to Beijing.
We just don't have, I just don't have that type of information at this point.
So you're saying that is not confirmed at this point?
That is not confirmed at this point.
White House spokesperson John Kirby saying they took action to limit what the balloon could gather. The Pentagon is also saying it's confident in that mitigation.
I know I sound like a broken record. I don't mean to, but what we know is that the intent of this balloon was surveillance, and that the measures that we put in place did not had limited additive value for what they were able to collect over our sensitive sites.
You mean that the mitigation efforts limited?
Correct. I'm sorry. The mitigation efforts that we put into place had little additive value for the PRC.
PRC is short for the People's Republic of China. The regime's foreign ministry says on Tuesday that the balloon was an accidental and isolated incident.
Are Western nations looking to build ties with China? On Wednesday, French President Emmanuel Macron landed in Beijing. During a speech, he urged Europe to loosen diplomatic tension with China in an effort to maintain dialogue. Macron also suggested that the regime could use its influence over Russia to play a positive role in the Ukraine war. He said China's so-called peace proposal for Russia indicates willingness to help resolve the conflict.
And so, if this is not a plan for peace, it is a willingness to have a responsibility and to try to build a path towards peace, and, I hope, to be able to participate in initiatives useful to the Ukrainian population.
The proposal comes amid ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Part of Beijing's proposal urges the West to drop all sanctions on Russia, a plan dismissed by many countries. Before the visit, Macron spoke to U.S. President Joe Biden about teaming up with China to wrap up the Ukrainian war. Though Washington is skeptical of Beijing's intentions, France isn't the only country taking this position. Last Thursday, head of the European Union stated that relations with Beijing have become more distant and more difficult in the past few years. In spite of that, she suggested Europe must de-risk ties with Beijing, though she also said the EU should reduce reliance on China. Back to Europe, on Wednesday, NATO foreign ministers met in Brussels, Belgium's capital. China's aggressive action in the Indo-Pacific and its alliance with Russia once again brought to the discussion table. Here's NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg.
The fact that we also see that China and Russia are standing closer together makes it just even more important that we are standing together as partners, NATO allies, and U.S. four highly valued partners.
Prior to the meeting, Canadian Foreign Minister Mélanie Joly also touched on the issue.
Canada believes that China is an increasingly disruptive global power and will continue to address the challenges of the Indo-Pacific here at NATO, but also at home, and that's why also we increase funding for security in the Indo-Pacific.
In recent years, China's territorial ambitions in the Indo-Pacific have pushed the West to shore up all alliances. Beijing's failure to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine also raises concern for the West.
A new move aimed at countering China. For the first time in its history, Japan saying it plans to give friendly nations financial aid to bolster their defenses.
In addition to the fundamental strengthening of our own defense capabilities, it is essential to bolster the deterrent capabilities of our friendly nations.
For Tokyo, the announcement marks a major departure from longtime rules. Those measures forbid using international aid for military purposes. Japan made it clear that the aid wouldn't be used to buy lethal weapons. Japanese media reported the likely candidates for aid include the Philippines, Malaysia, Bangladesh, and Fiji. The Philippines had been hoping to get radars to monitor China's activities in the South China Sea. Japan's move follows its decision last December to double defense spending in 5 years. The goal is to counter China's growing military power. TV and movie lovers beware. U.S.-based streaming service Hulu is reportedly pushing major staff cuts at its office in Beijing. People claiming to be impacted employees started sharing the news last week, posting to multiple social media platforms that around 200 staff members were affected. That number equal to around 90% of the Beijing office's total staff. Here's more.
The company does not offer streaming services inside China. Instead, the Beijing office offers tech support to the U.S. branch. It's also Hulu's second largest R&D center. Hulu has become a highly sought-after employer in China's cutthroat job market, thanks to its reputation for positive company culture, compensation, and worker benefits. Controlling shareholder Disney's recently announced cost-cutting measures are likely behind the layoffs. Hulu's severance package will reportedly be N+3. Chinese media says the founder of China's largest workplace real-name social platform revealed that the high-tech talents laid off by Hulu Beijing office are among the most sought after by other companies. The number of visits to their resumes increased by 12,000%.
That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here after being demonetized for 2 years. Here's what to look out for in our second half. To decouple from China or not? The major question is no longer the sole debate between China and the West. Rebecca Fannin, author and media entrepreneur on the chip wars between the U.S. and China, explains why she calls the growing split between the two superpowers a type of decoupling, and says it's already happening. The full episode is available on our partner platform, Epoch TV. To sign up, click the link down below. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. See you tomorrow.